Hey everyone, let's talk about grid template areas and how that can be used to create a multi-column layout or any kind of layout you want using grid. Grid template area is a way that you can define HTML elements by a grid area name. And then we use another declaration in the CSS where you can kind of lay things out in a visual grid with rows and columns. In this video, all I'm going to do is use some simple divs with just, the word 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they're going to have a background color, and I'm going to push them around using the grid template areas. So let's take a look at the HTML to get started, and then we will start styling this thing. I have a file here called Grid Area Basics, and just like any HTML file we've been working with, it's got the HTML doc type declaration at the top, the HTML root element with the English attribute. It's got the head with all of the stuff we normally have for our responsive layouts. I've got my title and I've got my link to my CSS. My CSS file is called gridbasics.css, and you can see that right here. I do have one style rule in there right now. In the body, I have a div called class grid container. And then in the grid container, I have a series of divs, and each of them have a class. They're called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Normally, if you were going to actually do a full web design, you wouldn't name them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would name them things like main content, aside content. You would give them more semantic or descriptive names. In this case, all I'm doing is doing a demo layout. So I'm just naming them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You should not do that in your actual web designing. So if we take a look, div class grid container is wrapping up all of our children divs. It closes down here. And I've got 6 child divs. One right here, it's called 1, another one called 2, another called 3, another called 4, 5, and 6. I want you to take a minute to get this markup, just as I have it. You've got a div class grid container, and that's containing 6 divs with just some text in it. Okay, name them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, you should be done by now. Let's go over to the CSS. This is all we're going to have for the HTML. Right now, I've got it styled so that all divs are going to have a font family of sans serif, a font color of linen, background color of navy, and padding of 2%. So if I were to look at this in the browser, it looks like this. Okay, it's just a vertical stack. I've done no styling yet. It doesn't conform to any kind of a grid. It's just a vertical stack of divs. So let's get started with making this into a grid. In order to do this, we're going to need style rules for .grid container. If we look at our HTML, that's what it's called. In order to make sure that you get the exact spelling. Sometimes it helps to copy the class name here and just paste it over here. If you're more confident just typing it out, whatever, you can do that as well. And then we need a style rule for each of these other div classes, class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to get those started as well. So .1, I'm going to copy it and just paste it because you know me, I like to be efficient. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'll rename them. Starting to think this is not more efficient, but whatever. And this is really all I'm going to need for style rules for this demonstration. So if we look at our HTML again, we have our grid container, and it's got a series of children. As you've seen in previous videos with both grid and flex, it's based on having a container and children. And the container gets to display property grid or flex, and all the children get pushed around by how we style that grid or how we style that flex. So if we go over to our CSS, grid container needs to get display grid. And if I look at this in the browser, nothing happened yet. Yeah, it's displayed grid, but we haven't set anything up in terms of how that grid is going to behave. So let's talk about how grid areas and grid template areas work. So we need grid template areas, the declaration, and I'm going to put some space in here because we'll need space. And then we need a series of grid areas. Each one of these divs, these named divs 1 through 6, are going to be given a grid area definition. And it looks like this, grid area. And I'm going to name this one 1. Copy this because I'm just going to paste it into the others. I'm going to name the 2 class div 2. So its grid area name is going to be 2. So what we're doing is I'm defining this div's class as the area called 1, and this div's class the area called 2. So each of these are going to be a defined area. 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now I've got this thing, the grid container that's set to display grid. I've got this grid template areas with nothing happening yet. And then each of these different child element classes have a grid area defined. So now the first one, 1, is defined as area 1. If I look here, it's the first div that shows up in my grid container, right? So keep that relationship in mind. Class 1 is also defined as grid area 1. And what we're going to do with this grid template areas is we're going to make a series of rows. A row looks like this. It is some double quotes. And then in between those double quotes, we are going to define what that row looks like. Okay? So in this row, I am going to have the 1 grid area take up 5 columns, or the total width of my web page. So I'll go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I'm making a 5-column, 5-row website here. And this is going to take up the whole top row. Now, 2 is going to be kind of like my navigation. It's also going to take up the whole top row. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. That's toe. 2. The next row is going to be like a feature. We've seen in previous videos where I've got my header, my nav, and then I've got a narrower sections called feature that might have a featured image and lead into a featured article or something like that. I'm going to make this the feature. It's going to be a little bit narrower, and it's going to be centered. I want it to take up 3 columns in the middle, and I want the left and right columns to be blank. If I want to leave a column blank in a row, you use the dot. So I'm going to put a period there. And then I'm going to have 3 columns made up of my area called 3. And then the right column, the rightmost column, the 5th column is going to also be blank. So I'm going to put a dot there. These dots are essential to making sure those things get left empty. Now, my 4th row is going to be 2 columns. I'm going to have 1 column that's going to take up 2 2/3, and then another column is going to take up about 1/3. So I'm gonna use 4 and 5, the areas 4 and 5. So I'm gonna go 4, 3/5 and 2/5. 4, 4, 4, 5, 5. So now this area right here is my area called 4. Okay? This area here, these two columns, are going to be 5. And then lastly, my footer is going to be 6, and it's going to span across the entire page. So 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. I don't need 6 sixes. I need 5 sixes. There we go. So here is what it looks like. The grid template areas is going to be this visual grid that we see here, where each row is going to be a series of these named areas that take up a given chunk of a row. I'm going to give these things some grid gaps so it's more visible. Make it just 10 pixels. And let's take a look at it in the browser now. Okay, so I can see that 1 is going all the way across, 2 is going all the way across, 3 is right here, although I can't see I should change the background of the grid container. I've got 4 and 5 sitting side by side, and 6 is at the bottom. I'm going to make my grid container have a background color of linen so that we can see that those gaps are there. There we go. Now we can see it a little bit more clearly. So you can see that 1 goes all the way the entire width of that container aside from its padding. 2 goes the entire width. 3 takes up that middle 3 sections, and you've got the left column and right column empty. 4 takes up 3 of the 5 columns. 5 takes up the other 2 of the 5 columns, and 6 takes up all 5 columns. Pretty neat. Now, these are all the same height. I might want to do some things with heights. I want to set some of the heights taller than others. Maybe I want to have the 2 columns 4 and 5 have a minimum height of 450 pixels. Maybe I want number 3 to have a minimum height of like 300 pixels. Let's play around with that a little bit. Okay, so my grid container now has a background color of linen so that we can see those gaps. It's got display grid, and I'm using grid template areas to push around all of these different divs that have named grid areas, right? I use grid template areas to decide where all of those areas are going to be distributed amongst the 5 rows. And now I'm going to set up my grid template rows. If you think back to previous videos of grid template rows, we can set up a series of arguments that are going to establish how tall those rows are going to be, how much space they'll take up. So the first one I'm going to have take up 15 CH, or 15 characters high. Next one is going to be my nav. I'm just going to set it to auto. I'm going to have it automatically set its height based on the height of the content. So if the navigation is taller, it'll get taller. If the navigation is really short, it'll stay really short. For my feature section, my third section, I'm going to use min-max. And what min-max does, it's a function that allows us to enter 2 arguments. The first argument is going to be the minimum size. The next argument is going to be the maximum size. So let's say I wanted to have a minimum height for my feature row to be 300 pixels. And I wanted the maximum to automatically set based on the height of the content. So it'll just get taller as the content gets taller. Auto. So that's what min-max is. The next one is going to be my 2 columns. And I want that to be a lot taller. I want the minimum height of my 2 columns to be 450 pixels high. And then I want it to have a maximum height of automatic. So as more content gets added in, it'll just continue to get taller and taller, but I don't want it to be any shorter than 450 pixels. Min-max, 450px, auto. And then my last row, I'm going to have it be a, I'll just have it set auto. I'm not going to do anything special with the footer. Just have it set to auto. So let's take a look at how this changes things a little bit. So this is what it looked like before I set my grid template rows. And there we have it with it after. I've got my 15 character high header. I've got my auto set nav. I've got my minimum of 300 pixel high feature, my minimum 450 pixel high 2-column, and then my auto set footer. So this is the very basics of grid template areas. This can be used extremely well when you do things that are responsive. You can rearrange that whole grid template area based on different breakpoints in the widths of your browser. And we'll explore that in future videos. Thanks for tuning in.